Just say your name and spell it.
What's that?
Say your name and spell it for me.
Henry Vaccaro, Vaccaro.
Okay, so do me one more favor and square your whole body up towards me. There you go. And
Like
then
that?
You're just going to talk right to Janae.
Okay. The only problem, looking right in that damn
Okay,
sun.
I actually do want to move a little bit. Let's go this way. Come over a little bit closer. That way there's not such a glare on his.
And that's much better.
Awesome. What about that
Here.
mask? Can you see
Actually,
that?
no. Let's do, why don't you move on this side, Janae? Put your chair over here.
Yeah, that is perfect now.
So come up a little bit closer, I want you. And then more right here, right into the camera. Here, stand up. Okay, go ahead and sit there. See, I told you she's better to look at than me.
I agree.
Okay. We're good to go. Let's go over here. So just start off where we're at. Let me make one more adjustment on that microphone. So it's not that big.
Can you see his jacket there?
Okay, Janae.
Okay, here we
Okay.
go.
Here we go, we're going.
I'm going to move you one more time.
Okay.
Stand up just for a second.
The microphone, okay.
Sorry. There you go. That might even be better for you.
Perfect. That more better?
Yeah, and that way you're looking, I don't know if you can more turn your body this way. There you go. And then you'll be looking right at Janae.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really good. Okay, good to go. Really, I promise this time.
Okay.
Okay.
So Henry, can you tell us where we're at and the significance of this building?
Okay, we're inside the Berkeley Carteret Hotel, which is the cornerstone of the whole beachfront in Asbury Park, New Jersey. The hotel was constructed in around 1926, and my grandfather had the contract to do all the landscaping at this hotel. And the owner couldn't pay him, and my grandfather took stock back. And I have those stock certificates. It's entitled Stock in Lieu of Debt. Back then he was owed over, I don't know, a couple $1,000, but that was a lot of money in 1926. Asbury Park in the heyday was a premier beachfront town along the entire Jersey Shore. Next town would be Atlantic City, which is an hour south of here. But this was the place. In fact, it boasted 2 train stations in a little town a mile long. You had a North Asbury train station and then the main train station. During the war, Second World War, this building was taken over by the British Navy. And it's the only piece of real estate named after a ship. It was named HMS, Her Majesty's Ship, Asbury. And they had to name it after a ship in order for the sailors to collect their pay, because they can't get paid if they're not on duty. So they were on duty on a ship, which was a piece of real estate. And they took it over for a couple of years, and they brought British sailors over here for R&R. And as different ships were being built along the coast, the sailors would then depart here and take the ships across to the war effort. Asbury Park started to decline in the 50s as they had a stock of old wooden hotels, and little by little they would burn down. And then you had the advent of the Garden State Parkway, which allowed people to travel from New York faster to newer places being built south of here. And Asbury just got in decline. It got to the point one time that they allowed all these old hotels to house mental patients, because the place called Marlborough Psychiatric Hospital, they were phasing it out, and they needed a place to put all these outpatients. And one time we had 1,600 mental patients living in boarding houses and old hotels along the beachfront. You know, the town was in really sharp decline. This hotel failed and was closed in, I would say, the late 70s. And for 8 years it was boarded up. I saw an opportunity and I bought it. I bought this hotel, which takes in an entire city block, directly across the street from the boardwalk, directly catty corner to the Asbury Park Convention Center. I bought the hotel for $325,000. They were going to demolish it. And this is my hometown, and I could not let that happen. I was having trouble raising money to restore it, and I put together a limited partnership that included Johnny Cash, who was my friend, Ernie Onassis, who was the anchorman on the Channel 7 News in New York, some other wealthy individuals that have Naney family, and anyway, we put together a limited partnership and raised the funds to restore the hotel. We obtained what was called a UDAG, UDAG grant from the federal government, and we got a grant of $3,100,000. It was based on the amount of equity that was going to be put into the hotel and the amount of new employees that would be hired. And after the hotel was restored, we won an award in Washington, D.C. as the best project in the United States for the use of public and private funding, this hotel. So I was very proud. The hotel is up and running, and we put $18 million in the hotel, did a complete gut. Where the hotel originally had 450 rooms, we brought it down to 250 magnificent, larger rooms. And the ballrooms were restored as they were in 1926 with beautiful plaster ceilings, and it was quite the place. The hotel took off. It was great, but there was nothing around it going on. The city then started a redevelopment authority. Excuse me, I gotta backtrack. The city at the time was going to sell the entire beachfront. They were taking bids, and they had one bid of $2 million. They're going to sell the entire beachfront, which consisted of 7 buildings on the boardwalk itself, the convention center, the Paramount Theater, all of this for $2 million. I went to court and stopped it. I got a restraining order. I stopped the sale, and I eventually succeeded. And the judge ruled that you couldn't even get, in the 2 weeks they allowed you to put the bid together, you couldn't even get a price on the insurance from an insurance underwriter. That's how big these buildings were. So I got the bid thrown out. I then convinced the mayor that the right way to do it was to set up some type of redevelopment authority, because by just selling the beachfront with no restrictions as to what you could do, you're just selling real estate and you know. Anyway, they hired a law firm called the Wilentz, Goldman and Spitzer firm, which at the time had put together the only successful redevelopment project in the state, which was in New Brunswick. So they were hired. The city then set up an advisory board. The mayor at the time was named Ray Kramer, and he was, I would say he was a little bit ahead of his time. He was a wise man, and he knew one thing: you got to get the politics out of the redevelopment. So they set up, on the advice of Wilentz, Goldman and Spitzer, an advisory board made up of prestigious business people in the area. It was chaired initially by a man by the name of Jim Rifficy, who was a vice president of Amarada Hess. Leon Hess was born in Asbury Park. So Rifficy lived in Asbury, so he's the chairman. Then you had the president of the New Jersey Natural Gas Company was on the board, the editor of the Asbury Park Press, 2 bankers, and a retired funeral director. They comprised this board. And the mayor, true to his form, kept politics out of it, which later became a big issue and destroyed everything. But at the time, took the politics out of it, and the city council agreed to abide by all the recommendations of this board. First thing the board did was they engaged the services of a planner, and they planned the whole beachfront, and it was quite the thing. And what they envisioned was you had two main arteries, Ocean Avenue, which runs parallel to the boardwalk, and then a block over a street called Kingsley Street. They envisioned closing off Ocean Avenue, much like Atlantic City, and making the new Ocean Avenue 2 blocks west, meaning Kingsley Street. That way allowed you to build on the street and to subdivide it into massive building areas. Each area had a designation from A1 to C1 all the way to B1 to D1. They then held public hearings, which took over a year, and they put it out to bid. At the time, my brother and I wanted to be instrumental in the development because then I was a building contractor, and I was building throughout the state of New Jersey, mostly public projects. And in the 80s, we're probably doing like $30 million a year. That's a lot of work. So we wanted to perpetuate our own business. So what we did is we bought real estate in every one of the areas that was to be developed. So if a developer came in, at least they got to talk to us, and we're going to, hey, get the shot at doing a building. So that was the original premise. But I went further than that. Ernie and asked us, I reached out to him, I said, see if you can get us a partner. We'd like to bid on the entire project. I had a meeting with Ernie and a local businessman named George Michaels, who was a friend with Ernie. And we met with a guy that was a former vice president of Cushman Wakefield, a man by the name of Dick Levy. And Dick says, hey, let us try and get you a partner. And he reached out, and I actually met with Donald Trump. I mean, Dick Levy's brother, Dick Levy was the best man at Robert Trump's wedding. So he had a direct connection to the now former president. And we met with Donald Trump, and he was very gracious, but he said he had enough in New York. He wasn't interested in Asbury Park. This is almost about the time he's starting to develop some casinos in Atlantic City, but Asbury Park was not on his radar. So Cushman and Wakefield reached out to a man in Connecticut by the name of Joe Carabetta, who had a company called CEI, Carabetta Enterprises, Inc., who was just developing a resort town called Revere, Massachusetts, north of Boston. So he was familiar with the resort area and everything, and he became our partner. And the deal was he puts all the money up. We end up owning 30%, my brother and myself. And then our real estate will be purchased from us at the appraised value at the time they needed it. So on the surface, it was a good deal all the way around. Carabetta had no ownership in the Berkeley. This was independently owned by the group of investors that I put together. And we opened up prior to the development, and we opened up to really, it was great. I mean, the attention all over the state. They did newspaper stories about Asbury Park, and I was featured in it with my brother, and it was quite the place, and we're doing incredible. The first year alone, we did over $3 million in food and beverage. Everybody wanted to come here. I had a food and beverage director, Mr. Robert Freddy, from the Carlisle Hotel in New York. Top notch. He was a Frenchman and impeccable. And we brought in top chefs, and we did some business. And then the room business was lagging a little bit behind us, but it was catching up. And everything is going great until 1988. Meanwhile, the development is now started. But in 1988, the city had a problem with the sewer treatment plant. And one 4th of July weekend, millions of gallons of raw sewage were discharged into the Atlantic Ocean. The only problem was the wind blew them on the beaches of Asbury Park. I don't have to tell you what happened then. It killed the summer business, it killed the next year's business, and the business after that. So the hotel is starting now to decline, is having trouble even meeting its debt. If you lose your summer business, what else you got? But the premise of the hotel, we had a feasibility study. It showed that we're going to do maybe 30% of our business from the convention center, which is directly right across the street. You had the Paramount Theater, which they had shows there, and you had the convention center, which had major shows all year round, and where else are the people going to stay but the Berkeley? So that was going good. Well, Next thing, the convention center closes down. And the hotel started to go in decline, and we eventually went under. Went under in probably 1992. And it's a sad state of affairs because the development started. We started building a high-rise building, and everything is on the upbeat. When I say we, my partnership with Joe Carabetta. Carabetta was a financial guy, and at the time, very, very successful. But 1989, 1990, we got hit with what was called a savings and loan crisis. Nationwide, over 1,200 banks failed, and the feds came in and put restrictions on loans to real estate projects throughout the country. 5 banks that we were doing business with failed. The bank that held a mortgage on a hotel failed. The bank that was loaning money for all their real estate failed. And the Bank of Boston, which gave the partnership a $50 million loan commitment to build a high-rise, was curtailed. They were not allowed to loan any more money, so they pulled the plug. They pulled the plug after advancing $18 million, and we had a frame of a building up 16 stories tall, the precast skin on the outside. The entire building was sold out with backups. So every apartment not only had a signed contract, you had a backup. That's how hot the project was. The bank didn't care, they pulled the plug. Carabetta, my partner, had to refund all the money, and it forced him into a bankruptcy. But it did worse than that to me personally. Just prior to that, Carabetta, there was a lot of friction going on, and he decided he should buy my brother and myself out. And he bought out our partnership for $9 million. $1 million a year for 9 years. I accepted it. I figured, hey, I'm set for life. Well, Carabetta went under, and the notes were worthless. I never received penny one. Meanwhile, the hotel, we couldn't make our mortgage payments. And this is the tragedy. I had very substantial limited partners, so much so that 3 of them and myself got on a plane and went to Buffalo, New York, to Marine Midland Bank. Marine Midland Bank held a fraction of the loan. The majority of the loan was held by the First National Bank of Toms River, which went under, taken over by the FDIC. Marine Midland had a participation of about 25% in the loan. We went to them to see if we could restructure the debt, personally guaranteed by 6 limited partners with impeccable net worth. We were turned down. Instead, the FDIC stepped in and foreclosed on a hotel, I think around 1992, 93. Got wiped out. What is so troubling is the FDIC got the hotel back for $1, and myself and my partners had $18 million invested in the hotel. As I told you, the city was in a state of decline, and by 1991, 92, you had a new city council. They knew better. They knew so much more than the redevelopment board, the advisory board. The first thing they did was disband the Waterfront Redevelopment Board with all these prestigious businessmen, bankers, presidents, vice presidents of major corporations, and they appointed themselves. They then fired Wilentz, Goldman, and Spitzer, one of the most prestigious law firms in the state, and appointed instead a friend of one of the councilmen as the redevelopment attorney with no redevelopment experience. Now the FDIC comes to the city council and basically said, we know how important a hotel is to the future of your city. We're going to give it to you for $1, but we need you to forgive the $500,000 in real estate taxes, but we'll give you the asset back. These jerks turned it down, okay? Instead, one of the councilmen reaches out to the FDIC, and I'm not going to mention any names, but I got this, there's a thing called the Freedom of Information Act, and when I found about it, I went berserk. This councilman writes a letter to the FDIC and says, I urge you as a city council member to sell the hotel to Maharishi Yogi and his Transcendental Meditation Company. I urge you, he says. He then goes and gets the Howard Johnson Hotel, or Howard Johnson Restaurant on the boardwalk to send the same letter. He then forges a letter with the head of the Taxpayers Association, all urging that they sell the hotel to Maharishi Yogi. Well, I'm not a detective, but something didn't look right to me. When I held all 3 letters up, they were all printed on the same word processor, and he spelt Berkeley Carteret wrong the same way on all 3 letters. And I then went to him, and he resigned. Meanwhile, this is a few years later when I found this out. Meanwhile, the Maharishi comes in and takes over this hotel. And they did not run it as a hotel. They ran it as a branch of the Medevihek University, where they're teaching transcendental meditation, and are using it to sell all their snake oil stuff throughout the country. This was a distribution and their offices. I was so pissed, I fought like hell, but it took me 3 years, and I finally, I might be jumping ahead, to show you there was a little collusion. They allowed the hotel to open as a Medevihek University, or whatever the hell they call it, owing back real estate taxes, and they still gave them a certificate of occupancy to run the place. I mean, I was ballistic. So I finally, I guess after a while, I put so much pressure on the city council that the code enforcement came in and says, hey, you can't run this the way you're doing it. And that forced the Maharishi to sell the hotel to a Chinese group out of New York. I think they paid $5 million, which meant Maharishi made it $4 million, and he eventually sold it for $17 million to the present owner, who is now doing the right thing and bringing it up to snuff and running it professionally as the way it should be. So that's my little experience with the hotel. But it was very heartbreaking to see what this council did, and they basically destroyed everything. I was approached, and I met the director who was running this for the Maharishi Yogi, and he told me the reason that the hotel failed is because we had the entrance facing wrong. It should have faced Mecca, then it would have been successful, but we had it facing south instead of east. So much for that. So this is only the 2nd or 3rd time I've been back in a hotel in all these years, and I'm here because there's 2 brothers, the Manzo brothers, have taken over the food and beverage operation, and with this new owner, they're really trying to bring it back to its former glory, and this is what I wanted. So that's basically why we're in the hotel. But now, I got to tell you a little bit about Johnny Cash and his involvement. Because without Johnny Cash, without Ernie Nassis, I never could have raised the money to restore the hotel. Back in 1976, I made an investment in a little guitar company called Kramer Guitar. I don't know anything about a guitar. I don't play a guitar. I play the stereo. I turn it on and I turn it off. But I love music, and I love country music. Well, if you're Italian, you love Frank Sinatra. Not me, I love Johnny Cash. If you mention country music in Asbury Park, you were a hillbilly, but I just love Johnny Cash. I first heard him in probably 1956 when I Walked the Line. Later on, when I went to college in my freshman year at Villanova in 59 or 58, I lose track of time, I guess it was 58, I kept hearing I Walked the Line it was just finally catching on out east. So I always wanted to see a Johnny Cash concert, and I found out he was playing in a place in Newark, New Jersey called Symphony Hall, and I went. That was my first Johnny Cash concert, and it was just incredible. The next one I went to was in Madison Square Garden. Johnny Cash was the first performer to sell out the new Madison Square Garden. And this is before Ticketron and all that stuff. You just heard it on the radio, and people flocked there. It was sold out 2 or 3 shows, so I'm hooked. Now, Johnny Cash would play at the Garden State Arts Center, usually like every other summer, which was located out on the Garden State Parkway. And I had a subscription there, which meant every Monday night I had 10 seats, and I would go to whatever shows were there. Well, when Johnny was there, I was able to wrangle myself seats for every night. So 7 nights in a row, I'm listening to Johnny Cash. Okay. Now I'm building a hospital. As I mentioned, my major business was building construction. And in today's dollars, I did over $1 billion in building projects. I think I built 32 schools, 7 high-rises, 5 hospitals. the Berkeley Carteret Hotel, big prison in Trenton, and industrial park. I mean, we did an awful lot of work. So I'm sitting in a doctor's office in Secaucus. We're working on this hospital. It was a private hospital managed by or owned by 5 doctors. And the contract was around $30 million back then in the 70s. So I'm sitting in the doctor's office and he's saying, look at this, Henry, the banks will not trust us to run the hospital. The only way we can get a loan, we have to hire a management company. And I'm looking at this company in Nashville called Hospital Affiliates. So meanwhile, he had to go somewhere, and I'm just thumbing through this book, and I see, oh, Hospital Affiliates, Nashville. I see Dr. Nat Winston on the board of directors. Well, I put 2 and 2 together. I just read Johnny Cash's autobiography called The Man in Black, and he attributed Dr. Winston with helping him get off his pill habit. Oh man, this is a connection. So I had Dr. Cavelli in Secaucus call Dr. Nat Winston in Nashville to arrange for me to meet Johnny Cash that summer when he performed at the Garden State Arts Center. Okay, I go to the show. Afterwards, I had a backstage pass to meet Johnny Cash. In fact, I had a little reception, and I got talking to him, and you know, we really hit it off. I don't know why. We just hit it off. And I said, you know, I have this new guitar. I introduced myself as being in the guitar manufacturing business, not as a builder. I wanted to try to have something in common with him. So I said, we have this new aluminum neck guitar. Would love to show it to you. He says, well, he says, we're staying locally at the Hilton Inn. He says, why don't you come by there maybe tomorrow morning around 10 o'clock. I'll introduce you to Marshall Grant and Bob Wooten, my guitar player. Perfect. Okay, this is why I know there's a God up there. I show up, and Marshall Grant, who was his original bass player from the original Tennessee 2, meets me, and they were expecting another guitar company, and the guy doesn't show up, and I show up, and they think I'm the guy, right? So right away, let me in, and I get introduced to Bob Wooten, and I tell him about this new guitar. And what's weird about this, the Kramer Guitar Factory was only down the road about 5 miles. I piled them in my car, off to the factory. That night on stage, the whole Johnny Cash band played Kramer guitars, aluminum neck Kramers with the V headstock. So we had Marshall Grant playing a Kramer bass. Jerry Hensley, his guitar player, had a regular Kramer guitar, and we made a custom guitar for Bob Wooten, his lead guitar player. So that night at the Arts Center, the whole band played Kramer guitar, and I'm elated. This is the start of, anyway, it starts a friendship. So now they would send me a tour schedule, so whenever they're in the area, I just call up and meet them backstage, and I start going to the shows, whether it's at Nassau Coliseum, Madison Square Garden again, or different venues all over the East Coast. I show up. I get to be friends with Bob Wooten. Well, back in those days, I used to do a lot of big game fishing. I would probably go to Bimini 3 or 4 times a year in the Bahamas to do big game fishing. I had a captain, Captain Jimmy, who was the only man alive that had 4 blue marlin over 700 pounds. The guy was a legend. In fact, the world's record was caught on his boat at one time. And he was just incredible. So I tell Bob, I said, hey, would you like to go on a fishing trip? And Earl says, hey, I'd like to go too. Earl was his piano player, so I invited Bob and Earl to Bimini. They met me at Miami. We flew over on a seaplane, and we stayed in a place called the Big Game Club, and it was an incredible time. If it could go right, it went right. The first day we're out, Bob hooks on a giant tuna, well over 700 or 800 pounds, and this thing just explodes like a depth charge when it hits the bait. You see water splashing all over, and Bob is in it, you're fighting this fish, and it broke the line. But he was hooked. I mean, once that happens, you are hooked. So all day he's sitting in a chair waiting for the next tuna. Well, we didn't get any big tuna. But that night, we went to the Big Game Club, which was a kind of like a private club, beautiful place. They had little guest cottages and maybe 50 hotel rooms, but a beautiful dining bar area and stuff. And there's this old black man playing a guitar, and his name was Ratty, R-A-T-T-I. And I introduced him to who Bob Wooten was. He knew who Johnny Cash was, but he didn't. Okay. And there was an old upright piano in a corner. So Bob says, Ratty, can I try your guitar out? Bob takes the guitar. They go over Earl plays the piano, and these guys put on a show worthy of a Carnegie Hall production. I mean, people are coming in a place they couldn't believe what's going on. So anyway, we had a great trip, and what I did was I would always pal around with Johnny on his tour bus. And I tell people I really got to be friends with Johnny Cash through his stomach. They said, what are you talking about? Well, he loved Italian food that you couldn't get in Tennessee. The Italian food in Tennessee back then was bad. And his housekeeper was full-blown Italian right off the boat. She had married his head of security, and she was a housekeeper. Armando, I forget his last name, he was a security guy. So anyway, there's a local Italian deli in a restaurant in the next town called Bradley Beach. And it was a place that had all these big 100-pound mozzarella, provolone cheese hanging in the window, the salamis and all this stuff. And I would go in and get all these fresh cold cuts, prosciutto, gabagool, salami, fresh Italian bread, and put it in a cooler and bring it on the tour bus. And after the show, going to the next venue, they'd all sit down and eat. And I mean, Johnny loved Italian food. So anyway, that's how I tell people I really got close to him, was through his stomach. So after the fishing trip, Bob says, Henry, you should invite Johnny. He would love this. I said, in some ways, I'm shy. I couldn't do that. I said, no. I says, so evidently, Johnny says to Bob, where were you? He says, I went on this great fishing trip to Bimini. So I'm on a tour bus with Johnny. We're sitting at the table. And he says, Bob's telling me about this place in Bimini. He says, you know, I love to go fishing. I says, really? He looks, he clears his conscience. He says, how about next June? Perfect. So Johnny Cash, John Carter, and myself and my son Henry go to Bimini fishing. And we actually made 5 fishing trips to Bimini. So the first time Johnny's there, we go back in the big game club, and this same black man, Ratty, is playing a guitar. So after dinner, Johnny says, Ratty, would you mind if I tune that guitar for you? So he gives him a guitar. Johnny tunes the guitar and sits down and plays for everybody. And I'm telling you, this was, I got a personal concert, right? And he played A Boy Named Sue. And on the original recording, they blooped out at the end. It says, you know, I'm the son of a bitch that named you Sue. Well, they beeped that out. So when he does it live, he says, I'm the son of a bitch that named you Sue. John Carter, his son, got so mad at him that we went outside. He said, Daddy, you know you're not supposed to say those curse words. And Johnny had to apologize to his son. His son was going to a Christian Bible school, and you're not allowed to say curse words. So that's just a little aside. So anyway, so from that fishing trip, an incredible friendship developed. Johnny is now making a movie in Georgia called Murder in Cayeta County. It stars Johnny Cash and Andy Griffin. Andy Griffin plays his land baron who murdered a black man, and Johnny Cash plays the sheriff Lamar Potts, who's got to convict Andy Griffin. And it's the first time in the history of the South where a white man was convicted on a testimony of a black man. So they didn't want the story told. And there was threats on Johnny's life and a whole bunch of stuff. But I spent a week in Griffin, Georgia, while the movie is being made. The first day I arrived, they had a car pick me up, and they take me way back into the swamps in Griffin, Georgia, and I get on Johnny's tour bus, which they pulled right up to the set, which he used as a dressing room and all that stuff. I just pull it right up there. So I'm on the bus, I'm talking to June, and Johnny is out shooting. And thank God I brought with me pictures of the hotel, which I had just bought, pictures of the convention center, pictures of all the beautiful boardwalk and everything. And June says to me, well, Henry, where are you from? Tell me a little bit about you. And I says, well, you know, I'm from Asbury Park, and I had these old photos. I remember my mama telling me some stories about Asbury Park. She says, it's a beautiful place. So then I told her I bought the hotel, and I had pictures of the convention center and the theater. Now, here's where I got a real history lesson. I mean, the Carter family was really the first family of country music. And June was just, what a beautiful person, inside and out. And she's telling me her stories. She says, now, and she would call me Henry with his little Virginia twang. Now, Henry, she says, The Carter family was going to be on the cover of Life magazine. It was going to be on the first Sunday in December. The only problem was it was December 7th, 1941, when they bombed Pearl Harbor. So Pearl Harbor got the feature story. We were never in the Life magazine again. So that was a little backstory. Johnny now gets on the bus and he's all sweaty. The first thing he does is he takes off his shirt, puts on another shirt, goes into the refrigerator, grabs a Coke, and we're sitting down talking. And June says, "Why, John, look what Henry's wanting to buy." And he said, "What's that?" And I had pictures that I took with me of the convention center of the hotel, and wow, that's some place. He says, he says, if you get that place, he says, I want to open it up for you. I want to be the first one in that theater after you restore it, and it's not going to cost you a penny. I looked down, I said, "John, I can't accept that." "What do you mean?" I says, "I'm not your friend to take from you." I said, "It would be my honor if you would just even ever show up there, let alone do a concert. But I would like to pay you what anybody else pays you. But if you want to take that money and make an investment in a hotel, maybe something could work out." He shook my hand, doesn't say a word to me. 2 days later, he brings down his CPA, his accountant. His name was Gary Baker from Nashville. And I get to meet Gary Baker. Gary Baker, besides being a CPA, was a stock car driver. And he had been hurt in an accident, so he couldn't drive anymore. So I found that interesting that a pencil pusher was a stock car driver. So Johnny says to Gary, he says, "I want you to go to Asbury Park and look at this project for me. When can you go?" He said, "Whenever you want, Johnny." So I'll make arrangements, and 2 weeks later, Gary Baker shows up in Asbury. I show him the hotel, which I had bought, but I still need limited partners. Show him the beachfront, and he recommended that Johnny invest in a hotel. So that was the start of it. So, excuse me, I need a little water. I gotta just look at this phone. Somebody's trying to get me. I'm not gonna talk to it, but I'm just curious.